brothers and sisters of Africa, and to everyone watching around the world. What if I told you that one man, in one of the poorest nations on Earth, just flipped the global power game overnight? This isn't a fairy tale, this is real. Burkina Faso, a land once forgotten by the world, is suddenly at the center of a storm shaking the West. And at the heart of it all stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader rewriting Africa's destiny. Just a year ago, global analysts laughed. Burkina Faso, they said, a nation with no chance against Western pressure. But they underestimated something powerful, a man with conviction. When Traoré came to power, the country was drowning in debt, suffocated by foreign influence and divided by fear. The West had its claws deep, from gold mines to political control. France, the EU, and even the US quietly dictated how this land should move, what policies it should follow, and who should benefit. But then the captain stood up. With calm fire in his voice, he said the words that echoed across Africa. We will no longer kneel. We will no longer beg. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, not to the West. And from that moment, everything changed. Within weeks, Traoré began dismantling the very system that had kept his country in chains for decades. He canceled exploitative contracts, nationalized critical industries, and threw out military agreements that gave Western powers access to Burkina soil. Western media called him reckless, but the people called him fearless. It wasn't just a political move. It was a statement of independence in the purest form. And then came the masterstroke, the move that would leave diplomats in Washington and Paris scrambling for answers. Traoré secretly began forming new alliances, not with Europe, not with the United States, but with nations that had also been pushed to the sidelines: Mali, Niger, and Guinea. Together they formed a coalition, the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a united front that refused to bow to foreign control. And here, where it gets wild, Traoré didn't announce it like most leaders do. He built it in silence, step by step, while the West still thought they had him cornered. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. Burkina Faso had already begun negotiating defense and trade agreements outside of Western institutions. No IMF, no World Bank, no NATO. Just Africa standing tall, standing proud. And then the bombshell. Traoré announced that all French troops must leave Burkina Faso immediately. The message was clear. You will not control our land anymore. People flooded the streets, waving flags, chanting his name. The young leader who once commanded a small military unit now commanded the hearts of millions. This was more than politics. This was the rebirth of African sovereignty. But behind the scenes, in the dark corridors of global power, the West was panicking. Intelligence reports, leaked cables, and media whispers began surfacing. The US and France couldn't understand how Burkina Faso managed to pivot so fast, build so much trust, and avoid the traps that usually follow nations that defy them. They underestimated the strategy. Because Traoré had a master plan, one so subtle, so precise, it's now being studied in global think tanks. He didn't attack the system directly. He replaced it piece by piece with something stronger: self-reliance. And the first proof of that strategy would stun the entire continent. When the French soldiers began packing their equipment, the world thought Traoré had just made an emotional decision, a nationalist outburst. But what the West didn't see was that this expulsion was only step one. Behind closed doors, in quiet meetings at Ouagadougou's presidential palace, Traoré was building something far more dangerous to Western control, a new foundation for African independence. Let's rewind to the beginning of that plan. For decades, Burkina Faso's gold had been extracted by Western companies. Billions worth of minerals were leaving the country every year, and yet the people remained poor. Every time the government needed funds, they'd turn to the IMF, the World Bank, or French aid packages. Loans, debts, and dependency, that was the cycle. Traoré broke it overnight. He called a meeting with Burkina's top economists, engineers, and military officers. His message was simple. We are rich, our land is rich, Our people are strong. If we cannot use what we have, then freedom means nothing. And that's when he launched Project Sovereign Gold. Under this secret initiative, Burkina Faso began redirecting all its gold exports, not to France, not to Switzerland, but to African partners and Asian buyers offering fair trade. The deals were silent, encrypted, and executed with military precision. Every ounce of gold that left the ground was now tracked, and the profits were stored in Burkina Faso's new sovereign fund, outside of Western banks. This fund, built quietly over months, became the backbone of Traoré's dream, a self-reliant economy free from foreign debt. Western financial institutions didn't notice at first. By the time they did, the reserves were already secure, billions of dollars worth of gold and assets now fully under Burkinabe control. This was the economic coup that no one saw coming. But Traoré wasn't done. He knew that economic independence meant nothing without energy independence. So he reached out not to France, not to the US, but to Russia and China. While the Western world debated sanctions and strategies, Traoré signed strategic energy and infrastructure pacts that would bring solar grids, refineries, and new roads across Burkina Faso, without Western interference. And this is where it gets brilliant. He didn't hand over full control to anyone. Unlike the old deals where the West owned the assets, Traoré made sure every foreign partnership was a joint venture, 60% Burkina, 40% partner. That meant ownership stayed in African hands. This subtle shift terrified global investors. Because if other African nations followed the same blueprint, the entire Western grip over the continent's resources could collapse in just a few years. And that's exactly what began happening. Soon Mali followed, then Niger. One by one, these nations started expelling foreign troops, nationalizing their mines, and joining Burkina Faso in what was now being called the Sahel Economic Bloc. For the first time in modern history, Africa wasn't asking for permission. It was taking back control. And the West, they couldn't believe it. Leaked diplomatic memos revealed their panic. One U.S. cable reportedly said, "Traoré is a contagion. His ideology is spreading faster than we can contain." But here, where Traoré's genius really shined. He didn't just rely on speeches or propaganda. He used strategy, the art of psychological warfare. He started using Western media's own arrogance against them. Whenever they attacked him, he didn't respond with defense, he responded with action. When they accused him of aligning with Russia, he announced agricultural reforms. When they said his country was unstable, he unveiled a new literacy campaign. Every criticism became a distraction tactic. While he built, they debated. This man wasn't just leading a revolution. He was playing chess, while the world thought he was playing checkers. And soon, Burkina Faso's transformation became undeniable. Satellite data showed new infrastructure projects emerging where there used to be nothing but dust. Local farmers began selling directly to markets in Mali and Niger, instead of relying on foreign aid chains. A new Burkinabe digital payment system was launched, reducing dependency on the CFA franc, the colonial currency controlled by France. And that, my friends, was the breaking point. France's elite financial circles started losing sleep. If Burkina Faso and its allies moved away from the CFA franc completely, France stood to lose billions in annual profits. It wasn't just about politics. It was about power, control, and money. So they tried everything. Propaganda, diplomatic pressure, even threats of sanctions. But Traoré didn't flinch. He addressed the nation, his voice steady, his words sharp as a blade. They tell us we are too small, too poor, too weak, but they forget we are the sons and daughters of Africa. We have walked through fire before and we will walk through it again. This time we walk free. That speech went viral overnight. Clips of his words spread across TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. Millions of Africans repeating his phrases like an anthem of awakening. We walk free. It became more than a slogan. It became a movement. In villages, schools, and military bases across Burkina Faso, murals of Traoré began to appear, not as a dictator but as a symbol of courage, of a continent reclaiming its dignity. And as all this unfolded, something even more unexpected began happening: respect. Even Western analysts who once mocked him began admitting his success. One European journalist wrote, "Traoré may be young, but his vision is reshaping Africa's balance of power faster than any politician in decades." The West realized they couldn't stop him. And that's when the true masterstroke revealed itself. Traoré had been building toward one goal all along: strategic autonomy. A point where Burkina Faso could not be threatened, sanctioned, or controlled, because it no longer relied on anyone but itself. And when that moment finally came, the world witnessed a silent revolution, not of armies, not of riots, but of sovereignty. But this story isn't over yet. Because in the next part, we'll uncover how Traoré's quiet alliances are reshaping Africa's entire geopolitical map, and why even the world's biggest powers now approach him with caution. The West may have underestimated him once. They won't make that mistake again. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, one thing was clear: the West had lost its grip. For decades, Africa's fate was written in foreign boardrooms, sealed in secret contracts, and dictated through debt. But in the heart of the Sahel, one man, a soldier, not a politician, had turned that script upside down. The question now was, how far would Traoré go? Because while the cameras showed progress, peace, and pride, behind the scenes, the game was still unfolding, and the stakes had never been higher. Traoré's government had just announced a new economic partnership, a Pan-African defense and development pact between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. To outsiders, it looked like a simple alliance. But insiders knew this was the final step in cutting off Western influence. This pact meant these nations would now share military resources, intelligence, and trade infrastructure. It was the beginning of what African historians are already calling the Sahel Renaissance. But while Africa celebrated, Washington, Paris, and Brussels went silent. In their reports, they didn't call it a renaissance. They called it a threat. Leaked Western intelligence documents described the alliance as a potential realignment of power in Africa that could permanently diminish Western leverage. And for good reason. Because Traoré's new financial system, the Sovereign Gold Reserve Fund, was now functioning as a regional safety net. Instead of waiting for IMF bailouts, countries could draw from this African-owned pool. Loans had zero interest. Contracts were transparent. No hidden conditions. It was the kind of financial independence the West had spent decades preventing. And yet it had already begun. The impact on the ground was immediate. In rural Burkina Faso, electricity grids powered by new solar stations began lighting up villages that had been dark for generations. Local schools reopened. Healthcare centers got funding. Small farmers were given microloans directly from the sovereign fund, not through NGOs, not through foreign investors, but through their own government. The people could feel the change. In one viral video, a farmer held up a new irrigation pipe and said, "For the first time, this water belongs to us, not to France, not to anyone else." That clip hit 10 million views across Africa. Because it wasn't just about irrigation, it was about freedom. Burkina Faso was no longer begging. It was building, but as Traoré's success spread, the pressure intensified. Foreign corporations began pulling out of West Africa, citing security risks. International NGOs warned of instability. Western media painted Traoré as an authoritarian, a rebel, a threat to democracy. But inside Africa, a different story was being told. In every capital city from Bamako to Niamey, from Accra to Addis Ababa, young Africans were chanting his name. Traoré, Traoré, Traoré. Not as a savior, but as a symbol, the first leader in decades who refused to bow down. And the more they demonized him, the stronger he became. Because for millions of Africans, every insult from Western media was a badge of honor. He once said during a televised address, "If defending our sovereignty makes me your enemy, then I wear that title with pride, because I'd rather be an enemy of oppression than a friend of submission." The hall erupted in applause. And that clip, it didn't just go viral. It went global, but here's the part that nobody saw coming. As Traoré was reshaping the economy and alliances, he was quietly working on something even bigger, Burkina Faso's digital transformation. The West was losing control of African minerals, but they still controlled one vital thing: data. Every bank transaction, every email, every international trade document, most of it passed through Western systems. Traoré wanted to change that. He assembled a team of African software engineers and cybersecurity experts, many of whom had studied abroad, but returned home after hearing his call for sovereignty. Their mission: to build Africa's first independent blockchain-based payment and trade system, designed specifically to bypass Western intermediaries. They called it Kiber, a word that means message in local language, but it symbolized much more: the message of independence. With Kiber, African businesses could trade directly, peer-to-peer, across borders, without using US dollars or European banks. This was the final nail in the coffin for Western financial dominance in the Sahel. Because now, Africa didn't just have resources. It had infrastructure. It had technology. It had a voice. And then came the retaliation. Cyber tax, trade restrictions, smear campaigns. The West wasn't going to surrender easily. But once again, Traoré was 3 steps ahead. Instead of reacting with anger, he responded with composure. He launched Operation Iron Shield, a joint cyber defense alliance between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. He told his generals, "They can block our accounts, but they cannot block our spirit. They can hack our systems, but they cannot hack our unity." That quote became legendary. And when asked by a Western reporter if he feared sanctions, Traoré smiled and said, "We've already been sanctioned by poverty for 60 years. What more can you take?" The audience burst into applause. The clip spread across social media, gathering millions of views in days. But perhaps the most shocking twist came when international observers discovered that Burkina Faso had secretly negotiated a rare earth mineral agreement with several Asian nations, bypassing Europe entirely. These minerals, critical for producing electric cars, smartphones, and renewable energy technologies, were now flowing through new African-led trade routes. The West was cut off. Burkina Faso had not only outsmarted them, it had outpaced them. And it all happened not through war, not through chaos, but through strategy. This was Traoré's masterstroke, a revolution of intellect and willpower. A victory that proved Africa didn't need permission, only vision. Today, as the world watches this transformation, one thing is undeniable: Burkina Faso has become a blueprint for a new era. An era where African nations don't just survive, they thrive. An era where sovereignty isn't a slogan, it's a reality. And in the center of it all stands Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier who rose from the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to become the face of a movement, reshaping the destiny of an entire continent. They tried to silence him. They tried to isolate him. But what they didn't realize was, you can't isolate an idea whose time has come. Africa is not the past, he once said. Africa is the future, and the future will no longer ask for permission. That line still echoes across borders. In classrooms, marketplaces, and military camps, it has become the anthem of a generation. So, what happens next? Will Traoré's model spread beyond the Sahel? Will other nations follow his footsteps and declare full economic and political independence? Or will the world's superpowers find new ways to reassert control? One thing's certain, the balance of power is shifting, and Africa is finally writing its own story. This is more than politics. It's history in motion, and it's only just beginning. If you want to stay ahead of these global power shifts, the hidden deals, the rising leaders, and the untold stories reshaping our world, make sure to subscribe right now. Because here, we don't just tell news. We reveal what they don't want you to know. Subscribe and stay tuned, because the next chapter of Africa's awakening is about to unfold.